It's great to be here, and thanks for Our Bookshop for hosting the first physical event I've done in a really, really long while. So it's a real pleasure to be here. And we're also delighted to be joined by Stu, who is the author, as you know, of 7 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle, and most recently, The Devil and the Dark Water, which I finished today. Appropriate enough, Ben asked me to do this a few weeks ago, and I said I'm going to need at least 3 weeks to read the book. It's a pretty long one, so I just got there just in time, so I'm pleased about that. To kick us off, I just thought I'd tell you a bit about the book. It's a tale of devilry and murder, and there's a bit of mythology in there, all set on the high seas in the 1600s around these old Dutch shipping routes. And it's a real page turner, but I also found it one of those books that has a great deal of detail and historical kind of accuracy, or what I assume is historical accuracy. From the time I don't know a great deal about that. And it's been widely praised in the media, if you've seen any of the reviews, both for the story, but also for the quality of the writing, which is a real accolade for a book of this type. So, Stu, do you want to just tell us a bit about the book to kick off with?
Sure. First of all, and the most important thing, I think, is it's not rubbish. So that is huge for an author, believe it or not, because I start the first page convinced that it is going to be rubbish. And then when I get to the end of it and it's not rubbish, I am quite pleased. So it's not rubbish. It's set in 1634. It's about a merchant vessel that's traveling from Batavia, which is now Jakarta in the East Indies, all the way out to Amsterdam on an 8-month voyage. And it's carrying this, it's got spices in the hold, it's got noble passengers, it's got a cutthroat sort of deadly crew, it's got this wide variety of passengers. But as soon as it sets out to sea, really strange, spooky things begin to happen. So I won't go into the details of it, but it begins to build up and look like there's a demon on board causing all of this mischief and carnage, and something terrible is going to happen. Thankfully, the world's greatest detective is on board the ship and he can sort it out, but unfortunately he's a prisoner and he's in chains and he's accused of a crime, and even he doesn't know what he's been accused of, and he's been thrown in the hold. So it's up to his sidekick, his sort of Watson-style sidekick, to step up and solve the mystery in his stead. And that is the first 5 pages. And then after that, you're just shot out of a cannon. That is what I want to do, over 130,000 words.
It feels like, I always think it's really trite to ask authors where they get their ideas from, but I think in your case, it's probably justified because the ideas are a bit out there at times. If anyone's read 7 Deaths, you'll know what I mean from that. And this book as well, such high concept stuff. Does that concept take years to come together? Is it the kind of thing where like a seed is there and then over time you start to build it and build it and build it? Or is it like a moment when you think, I'm going to write a book about this?
Both is the terrible answer to that. 7 Deaths I thought about 7 Deaths for about 12 or 13 years. Like, I wanted to write an Agatha Christie novel, couldn't try to work out how to make that work, and that took 12 or 13 years. But then the idea, when it arrived, felt like it arrived fully formed, just on a plane, and it just came to me. This one, for Devil, I'd actually been backpacking around Australia for a year, and I missed my flight out of Australia because I'm an idiot, and I ended up in the Perth Maritime Museum, and there was an exhibition about the shipwreck of the Batavia. And this is a brutal... Does anybody know this story? Is anyone familiar with it? I'll just give you the précis because it's really horrible, and if I go into it, we'll all just slit our throats by the end of the night. So the ship was sailing out. That one was coming from Amsterdam, and it was on its way to Batavia, to Jakarta. And it had a month left of the voyage when it was wrecked off the coast of Australia. And they obviously, at this period, they didn't know where they were. They didn't know, it was uncharted waters, celestial navigation and dead reckoning. They had no clue where they'd got to. So the captain and the senior officers managed to offload a bunch of passengers onto the islands, and then the captain takes off to try and get some help. And he disappears. Unbeknownst to him, he's left the passengers, the survivors, in the hands of a psychopath. And the psychopath, by the time he returns 2 months later, the psychopath has butchered 125 of these people, and worse. It's a genuinely awful, soul-wrenching story. And as you can imagine, when I was reading about this in the Maritime Museum, I'm like, this is fantastic. Like, there's so much about it. There was so much atmosphere. There was so much about the period that was interesting, because it's a Dutch East Indies ship. It's not the boring old British East India Company. So it was like a entirely different sort of imperialism. And there was a bunch going on with it. And within the real life story, after the ship was wrecked, one of the people who got off the ship was a soldier called Weaver Hayes, who my character Arent is based upon. And he fought this running battle for 2 months against the psychopath and the psychopath's acolytes. Because the weird thing was, the psychopath had a cult of personality. He never killed anyone himself. He was like Charles Manson. He managed to convince all these other people to do the killing on his behalf, and not once did his authority waver. So he was like, and he seemed to enjoy it and get off on it. It was a very strange story. But this soldier managed to lead a resistance. He built a fort. He got like refugees and survivors. It was just all these little stories within this big story. And it just felt like a splinter. It was just always there. And when I got to the end of 7 Deaths, I was genuinely like, I am never doing that again. Like, I don't want to be the 8.5 death, 8.5. So I was talking to a US crowd where it's 7.5 deaths. I don't want to be the 8 deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle guy. I don't want to be the 9 deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle guy. I want to do something completely different, completely unexpected. And this just felt like the natural fit. But I didn't want to tell the story straight up because it's too awful. I wanted my second book to be fun and just like really entertaining and just to bop along. So yeah, it was kind of, I thought about it for a couple of weeks and it just kind of felt right. Like, you've done this, like you come across the idea and you're like, that's what I want to do now. Because the first person you've got to entertain is yourself. Like, I spent 2 years writing books, and if they don't entertain me in the writing, they're definitely not going to entertain people when they read them.
I definitely found this one more of an adventure story. I mean, 7 Deaths had the elements of mystery and death in there, and the kind of whodunit aspect to it. Whereas this one was, I wouldn't call it swashbuckling, no. But there was certainly like the adventure on the high seas thing, and all that kind of those myths and those superstitions that sailors bring with them about these things that happen on cursed ships and all that.
Yeah, there's such joy in the period. There's such joy in the historical research. And when I mean, that's where I started. I knew I had my setting, I had the ship, and I started to look at it and be like, right, okay, what's the story going to be on this ship? And I started to delve into the history and what was happening and what was in the world. And then I started to watch pirate films. Like, that was the other thing. So I did the really intense historical research, and then I started to watch films like Captain Blood, where Errol Flynn is just swinging across ropes with a sword in his teeth and stuff. And I was like, I kind of want both. Like, I want that swashbuckling. I want that action adventure-y, the storms and all the stuff that comes with it. Because in a weird way, if you write, it feels to me like if you write a book at sea, people kind of expect that. Like, some people want the Master and Commander, which I definitely haven't done, and other people want this kind of thing. So I wanted to one of the tropes of both.
But then I suppose it's got that kind of the personality in it. He's not like kind of swinging around this place, swaps by the same time, because most of it he's locked up. But Samuel Pipps, detective, is that kind of a big personality, the flamboyant kind of character who everyone's drawn to.
Yeah, because again, when I wrote 7 Deaths, the point of that novel was to fill it with vile, terrible people. Like, everyone in that novel is detestable, purposely so. So when I came to write my second book, to keep myself sane, I wanted to write a bunch of people I could go to the pub with. Like, I wanted a bunch of people that I would enjoy hanging out with for 2 years. So I tried to make them all kind of interesting and entertaining, and give them relationships to each other that I could develop and explore and get into, and just have them genuinely seem to enjoy each other's company, because I didn't get to do that in my first novel. And so Sammy immediately kind of leapt off the page as, like, his personality just arrived. It was just, that's who he was going to be, because he is the Sherlock Holmes of the story. He is the world's greatest detective. He has the confidence that goes with that. He has the confidence of being like the smartest man in any room he's ever walked into. So that told me who he was. But then Arent, as his sidekick, is this massive, shambling, hulking soldier, right? But then he has to somehow live with that. He can't just be, you know, when you're writing that character, you can't have him be crushed by this superior personality. So elements of him had to be raised up, like his wry humor and the way he deals with his friend, while other bits, like his self-confidence thing, had to be crushed, because you cannot be clever if you're stood next to a genius. You just can't. Like, even the cleverest man stood next to, like, Albert Einstein's lab assistant probably had like an IQ of like 130 and probably thought he was a dumbass, like, every single day. And I kind of wanted to capture that with this relationship. And
Arent is kind of the fulcrum of the book, right? Things seem to just pivot around him, though he's the assistant. So Sammy the detective, it feels like as a reader, your access to him is kind of almost limited. It's like a treat.
Yeah,
Whenever he comes
exactly.
along, they dip into his cell, they talk to him, they bring him out on deck for a bit, but it's always like, oh, when he's back. Whereas Arent, you're kind of there constantly.
Yeah, because he's quite a dogged. Like, I wanted to sort of explore detective styles. I did this a little bit in Seven Deaths as well. Like, each character has their own unique way of investigating this mystery. So for Sammy, it's very Sherlock Holmesian. It's very just wild, deductive, and like just brilliant, noticing little things to everyone else and putting them together in interesting ways. Arent is much more a sort of Raymond Chandler, sort of Philip Marlowe kind of character. He just asks questions and gets in fist fights and gets beat up. And somehow by getting beat up, he arrives at answers. Like, he's just that kind of guy. He's, you know, he asks questions with his fists in his face. And then you've got Sara, who is is a noble woman on the ship who gets dragged into this and wants more to do. And she's a third, like, entirely different style of investigation. And again, it was just the joy of sort of like giving all of these characters a different way of getting into this mystery. Because if anyone's ever tried to write a Sherlock Holmes story, the problem with Sherlock Holmes is a superhero. Like, just as a pure structural thing of writing a novel, Sherlock Holmes, and you notice this when you run back through the Conan Doyle stories, Sherlock Holmes's powers are always at their most intense in the first 2 pages. He's brilliant for the first 2 pages. Someone's walking down the street outside and he knows everything about them by the time they get to the door. And when he actually goes to investigate the actual mystery 5 pages later, he's just noticing things written on the wall, because his powers are so intense that if you obey the laws of them, he should solve every mystery in about 13 seconds. So he can't. I didn't want to do that. I wanted Sammy to be as brilliant every time I wheeled him out. As you say, I wanted him to be a treat. I wanted him to push the novel on, but you only get him in like breadcrumbs and little bits of him. And I never wanted to dilute his powers. But as a writer, that's a bugger to write, because it just means he's on all the time. He's observing everything. He knows everything about every character just by looking at him. It's insane. So structurally, I had to lock him away. I had to do something with him so he wasn't doing that. And by doing that, I get to put the limelight on the sidekicks, which are more interesting for me anyway.
Yeah, so you deliberately restrict access to the hero.
Yeah, because he's a tool. And like, Sherlock Holmes is a tool. Like, in reading those novels back again, that's what I discovered, that Sherlock Holmes is a prick. And like, all the other characters, the world works because all the other characters are like, oh, he's a prick, but we like him. And me as a reader was like, I don't like him at all. And you notice that when people adapt him, when Moffat adapted him for the BBC, when Jeremy Brett did it for the old ITV series, his emotional arc is to make him human. That's what they do. He starts off with the Conan Doyle Sherlock Holmes, and then they mildly make him human as he goes along. He develops relationships with people, and he never really did that in the books too much. He starts off as a prick and he ends as a prick, and that's his emotional journey. But everyone's like, oh, he's amazing, he's great, but he isn't. All he ever did was satisfy his own intellectual curiosity. He would, like, you know, if a woman with a small child and an orphan came to him and was like, help us, he'd be like, oh, that's boring, I'm not doing that. Like, we root for this guy. This is insane. No, yeah. Sorry, a little rant, Sherlock Holmes rant there. Apologies.
I really think if any publisher is watching this and is going to reprint the Sherlock Holmes stories, they should have a quote on the front, Stuart Turton. Sherlock Holmes is a prick.
Yeah, that would be my blurb. I am free to blurb on Sherlock Holmes reprints.
Talking about that kind of the kernel of the idea and where you kind of get to with it, does it change as you write it? Or do you have the destination in mind? Obviously, destination is a weird thing with a book about a journey. Do you know where you're going with it? Because you had that kind of basis in truth for this. Was there always a set path, or do you get, much like the ship, knocked off course midway through?
It was weird, this one. I mean, full disclosure, I know Jamie outside of this stage. We are friends, and we live like a street away from each other. So he's seen me during this period. I have a young daughter, and she was born a month after I started writing this book, and I finished it 2 days after her 2nd birthday. So the way I write novels is that I plan them meticulously. So 3 months, I plan and I research, and then I plot everything down, chapter by chapter, Excel spreadsheet, bang, 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 I know where everything is. I don't plan my characters, but we'll maybe come back to that later. And then once I have my plan, I internalize it. It all sinks inside me, and then I've got it, and I can do whatever I want with it. So if I need to change something, because as I'm writing, I'm discovering more things about the characters, I can just change them. And I write out of chronology as well. So I don't write chapter 1, 2, 3. I'll write the chapter that's most interesting to me that day. So if it's chapter 52, I'll write chapter 52, and then tomorrow I'll write chapter 12. And that's how I operate. You cannot do that with a newborn baby. You cannot function with a newborn baby. I was lucky that my body regulates its own heartbeat and my breathing, because I would not have been able to do those with a newborn baby. I found it incredibly difficult. So I had my plan. And then when I set off writing it, I wasn't listening to it, I wasn't obeying it, I wasn't paying attention to it. All I was doing was writing for my life, like just trying to keep above. And I had a deadline somewhere in the distance that I was just desperately trying to hit. So for a full year, I was sleeping about an hour or 2 hours a night and trying to write this book. And you would have seen me during this period just been like, ugh. And I wrote 170,000 words in about a year and a bit of just desperation writing. And I kept, and this is the truth, 17,000 words of them. So I was blown badly off course. So after the first year of it, it was an interesting thing, because my poor publisher, so I'd already missed about 3 or 4 deadlines at this point, and I just handed her just piles of paper. I was like, that's yours now. You take that. Because what I needed was 3 weeks away from it to work out what I needed to do and how I was going to fix it. And so it went away, and she read it. God bless her, she read it. And I knew I didn't think even 17,000 words would make it through. I was just like, I need it to go away. And while she was reading it, I went back to my plan and looked at my plan and rejigged it a little bit from what I'd learned from those words. And then I started all over again. So yeah, and then once that happened, it was the smoothest experience. It was really nice. I mean, it was smooth in the sense I was under enormous pressure because I'd missed so many deadlines and I'd missed a year of writing. But I knew what I was doing every day. I was just like, okay, I've just got to do this, and get to the end of it. So yeah, it was a really, really weird one, and I'm desperately hoping I never do it again, because it almost destroyed me.
You talk about research there. I think for those of you who haven't read it, and those of you who are going to read this book, the detail in it is really incredible, and things become really familiar to you. I'm thinking of like the claustrophobia of the Orlop deck, which just feels horrendous. All these people crammed in, there's no space. You talk about, you went to that museum in the first place, but how do you build the detail out? It feels like you set kind of laws for the world you're working in at the time. Is that bulked out with like a lot of reading about shipping in the 1600s, or is it that kind of museum visit and then you go to more museums? I don't know, with this kind of time period.
No, there was actually a lot of research for this. So they've rebuilt the ship that was wrecked, that was the inspiration for this. They've rebuilt it, and in a place called WHILEY, outside in the Netherlands, outside of Amsterdam. So I went there for 2 days. That's how I got the claustrophobia immediately. I went to that, but I'm 6'2". Arent is supposed to be even bigger in this time period. And that's because when I got to this boat, you stand outside it and it's enormous, and you get inside and it's the smallest place you've ever been in your entire life. There's a real sort of reverse TARDIS thing going on. And I was hunched for 2 days, and it made me grumpy and it made me irritable. And there was only like 30 odd people on this boat clambering around like tourists, and it felt like the most claustrophobic place in the world with 30 people on. And there would have been 300 people on this ship in the time period that I'm writing about. So I was just like, this is great. Like, I've got all of this going on. And I pestered all these poor volunteers with questions about how this ship would sail, because it's not even, to my eyes, I know nothing about shipping. I still don't know anything about sailing. But it felt like it didn't even feel like a ship from the golden age of sailing. It didn't have the big wheel that I expected it to have. It didn't set up, it didn't even look the same. It's a really unbalanced, weird looking ship. And I couldn't get my hand around it. So I had to go and talk to these volunteers. And they were like, oh, so you pull this handle here and you do this thing. So I just asked questions. And anything I didn't understand, I went and asked a question about. And so I had reams of notes. And then when I came back home, I went and sat myself in the British Library and got them to bring me they have all the journals of people who were on these ships in this period, passengers just on board these ships, and they just bring them out. And I just read through them one after another, these journals of people on these ships. And that's where a lot of the names come from, like the passenger manifests and the journals and the diaries. So from that, I got all the stuff about the way you would, excuse my language, wipe your ass on these ships, and where you would go to the toilet and how you'd wash your clothes. All these horrible little details all came out of these journals.
Yeah, it's genuinely horrendous.
Yeah.
Some of it, but I'm glad you mentioned that ship, because as I was reading it, I Googled the ship, trying to figure out which one it was. And I think I saw a picture of it, so I had the right thing in my mind's eye. So I was going, I don't know what this is actually. I ended up Googling Orlop deck because it just kept sticking with me. And I think it's because I've got a phobia of rats. And there was a lot of like the rats coming over them as they slept and that kind of stuff. So it was a truly horrific experience.
When I gave the book to my wife, who's probably watching, so hi, so she read it and she liked it and she was like, oh, that's a good book. I was like, one note. And I was like, what is it? And she was like, was it really called The Poop Deck? And I was like, it is. And she's like, you're going to have to change that. And I'm like, why? And she's like, well, that's where they, you know. And I was like, oh, they didn't. They did that at the other end of the ship. It's like, why has it got? And then we got in this really weird rabbit hole of why it was called The Poop Deck and sort of thing. But that was her only note that I couldn't possibly call it that.
Sort of a note of childish humour.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, just, everyone's just going to be like, oh, this is very tense. Poop.
You talk about the journals you read and stuff like that. What about the I mentioned at the start kind of mythology and devilry, and there's this old Tom kind of devil character which is in the title, which comes through the book and causes a bit of trouble on the ship. Is that rooted in anything? Again, I ended up Googling old Tom. There was a few like American like myths and laws and that kind of stuff. Is it based any truth, or is that all of your own?
No, it's so. When I was doing historical research for the novel, the superstition, the devilry, it was all part of this period, right? And all these sailors would have got on with these superstitions, and it makes sense because 1634, they didn't know where they were going. It was dead reckoning from port. They would just like pick a direction off they went. 1 in 3 people on one of these ships would die. They would either die of a shipboard accident or a disease, or they would get to the East Indies and catch malaria and die, or they would drink themselves to death. But 1 in 3 died. So it wasn't something you did with any hope. And you only ever got on one of these ships because you were desperate. You were running from something at home. You couldn't stay, so you had to go. And if you went, you were probably going to die. So you had to believe in something. So they carried these superstitions on. So I had to have the superstitions because it's too good. It's too good a mine not to dive down. So I got really into that. And then out of that comes the devilry. It comes the burning of witches and all this sort of stuff, which was still very prevalent. So I started to get into that, and I started to be really, really fascinated. And then I came across the Demologica, which is a book that is in this book, but it was based on a real life thing. It was written by King James, who was super into this stuff, and it would rival the Bible for knowledge. Like it was the Demologica in real life was they're a different title, but it was a compendium of demons and their hierarchy in hell and where they sat and how to summon them and how to banish them and their particular methods of corrupting human beings. And it was dead serious. There's not a joke in it. It's but they genuinely believed it, and it would have gone out there and people would have read it and been like, oh my God, like this is serious. So I went and had a little look at it, and it is an act of horrific imagination. Like there's drawings of these demons, and they're just like, that is, you had some problems. Like whoever did that there's a lot of things that look like penises, put it that way. And one of the things that came out of it was a demon called Astaroth the Inquisitor, and he got to you by asking questions that you didn't want to answer. How perfect is that for a mystery novel? Yeah, so I took Astaroth. The problem with naming him Astaroth is everyone's going to do, I thought everyone would do what you were going to do, which is just to go and Google him, and then you've got all the information. And I didn't think that would have been the way it would have worked in the period, and this is just me taking a flyer. I don't think the name Astaroth would have gone out everywhere. I think it would have been, that's the way these superstitions work, right? It would have gone from village to village and changed a little bit, Chinese whispers all the way through until it got to your village, and it's old Tom. It's just like a little old man in rags who comes around, and just bad things begin to happen about him. And old Tom, it felt simultaneously disarming and sinister. It had a nice sort of, it's just old Tom. It's just old Tom. And there was something about it. The repetition of it makes it scarier than it initially is. So yeah, that was a joy. Like that part of the book and getting into it, because I wanted from the start the idea of, in my head, I've got this image of like, you know, the end of like the Agatha Christie novels where Poirot sits everyone down and explains who did it and all the suspects are there. In my head, I've got like sort of like the Governor General, his wife, his daughter, the devil, someone else. And I was just like, I'd love that if like the devil, a demon, was just one of the suspects and like it could be accused and interrogated. I thought that'd be wonderful. So,
and he becomes this demon that people justify other things through. So bad stuff that's happened in their hometown, they can then just blame it on old Tom because they've heard about it, and that's why the barn caught fire. Or something like that.
Exactly. And that's the way it always works, right? That's the superstition thing. That is the devil thing. That's what it's there for. It's there to be blamed for every terrible thing that you do, for every temptation that you give into. It wasn't me, it was the devil. And putting that on a boat, an enclosed, claustrophobic environment where half of these people are dreadful anyway, it was too good an opportunity to turn down. Because when you're creating a mystery novel, I don't like red herrings, which is a weird thing to say if you've read my books. What I like is to have a dozen competing mysteries. And then, so everyone's got a secret and everyone's after something. And then I layer clues to all of those mysteries and they become the red herrings, because what you're actually looking at is just the wrong mystery, the wrong clue to the wrong mystery. And the real mystery, the thing that you're interested in, is in there somewhere in the middle. So if you've got a devil who's just mixing things up and messing things up and is like everything's pointing to that person, you've got this wonderful just suspect sat right at the middle of your novel, and you can use that to send other people off on interesting tangents. You can change their story, becomes a nexus for it. So everything I do, I'm really interested in the structures of novels and kind of how you can mess with them and what characters do and what tropes can be used for. So that was what that was for.
Talking about characters, I'm imagining, so you mentioned some of the people there, the nobleman, the governor, the governor's wife, all these people that make up the story. I'm imagining a kind of desk at home with sketches of these people in period dress and who they are and their motivations and stuff like that. Is that how you approach it, or is it more like you said the plan kind of doesn't change, but the characters change? Is it a set cast from day one, or how do you?
No, so especially with this one, the cast was much bigger because I like ensemble casts. Like I like big casts for mystery novels. I like to give the reader a lot of people to root for and to hate and to suspect at different points. So the cast for this was a little bit bigger when I first started, and a few of the characters ended up doing quite similar things and getting combined into one character, because that was just the plot kind of took me that way. But I tend to, when I plan silhouettes of characters, so I know I need someone vaguely that shape, with that sort of disposition to get me to this point. But when I start writing that person, because I don't know what it is, I can't find my characters in the planning. Like I just can't come up with them. I can't conceive of them. I can only get them when I start writing them and putting them in rooms with each other. So I tend to overwrite dialogue. I tend to overwrite character interactions a lot because I'm trying to figure out who they are and what they're about. And when they start talking to each other, that's when I know who they are. And then if they won't do the thing that the plot needs them to do, then I have to give that to somebody else. I have to sort of change the plot around them. So I don't, but the thing is, to go back to the initial point, I don't sketch them because I don't really see them. I don't see the faces particularly. I'm terrible at visual identity of characters. Famously, and we've talked about this in the past, there was, up until one of the very final edits of Seven Deaths, there's a scene near the end of that book where one of the characters takes off this mask they've been wearing. And in the space of 2 paragraphs, the first time you've seen him, in the face of 2 paragraphs, he takes his hood off, revealing this head of curly hair, and then he runs his hand over his bald scalp. Like 2 paragraphs later, and it got through quite a lot of edits. And it's because I just don't see them. I don't care. I'm more interested in what's going on inside. And so with this one, when I was thinking about them, I wanted them, my initial idea was to make them kind of resemble, like I wanted the features to kind of resemble the disposition, the personality, and then realized how hackneyed that was. So I just dropped it immediately. But yeah, so I didn't really see them, but the period clothing was just a pain because you have to describe that stuff. And there's nothing I have look at the state of this. Like I have no interest in fashion whatsoever. So just reading about any fashion in any period is the most boring thing I could be doing. And all of a sudden I'm reading about ruffs, but ruffs didn't appear until this period, and type of shoes. And like, well, I was like, oh, I don't want to do any of this.
It's interesting then. So character is secondary to plot. Plot is the guiding thing, and then the characters have to support the plot or they're out.
No, other way around. So the plot comes first, and I understand my plot. When I start to find my characters, they guide the novel. Like if they're not willing, if their personality is such that they wouldn't do the thing the plot demands, I change the plot for that character. The big example of this one is Sara, who is the noblewoman. She initially was a secondary character. She was just another suspect. And as the novel wore on, she was the most interesting character to write, and I was enjoying her so much that I kept writing for her, and she kept demanding more of the novel. She kept demanding more to do. She didn't want to be what the plot wanted her to be. So she pushed out of the plot and became part of the triumvirate. So now there's 3 main characters instead of 2.
Yeah, you kind of see that in her arc, don't you? When she turns up, you think it's about the 2 of them, and then by the end of it, she's really central.
She's there, yeah, exactly. And that wasn't in the plan. Like in the plan, she was very secondary, and she ended up taking quite a lot of Arent's plot away, because Arent, as I wrote him, I discovered he was a much more reluctant character. He doesn't want to be, he has to step up and solve this mystery in Sammy's place. He doesn't want to do it. He has no interest in doing it. He's not a sidekick who wants to be the hero of this story. He tried that and he fucked it up. So he doesn't want to do it again. So that reluctance, initially I was trying to write like a hero's arc for him, where he grows into his power. And actually it turned out to be much more interesting just to have a guy who's just like, nah, I don't want any part of that, thanks very much. I know what I'm good at, I'm going to do this until I get you out. But Sara does want that. Like she does want that arc. She does want the hero's journey. She does want to be at the forefront of this mystery. She's cleverer than he is. She's more daring than she is. She's much more cunning than he is. And so it just made sense in the writing, as I found these people, just be like, cool, you have all that, then off you go.
Yeah. I'm always grateful to the people with both your books who put the kind of cast of characters at the beginning to refer back to as I'm going through, particularly the first 100 or so pages where I'm like, hang on a minute. What was that one?
Are you interested in another character? Stop it. Stop it.
A minute ago, you talked about red herrings, which kind of, I'm surprised that you said you don't like red herrings, because I think both your books really almost delight in wrong-footing the reader. So, but you don't like red. Is it misdirection then?
Yeah, sorry, right. Like the term red herring, I mean in the sense of like just laying down something that turns out to have absolutely no meaning later on. Like I really dislike that, where Poirot finds like a piece of cotton on a tree and it just turns out that it's like there for some boring reason. And it has to be explained. I like everything to have meaning. I like everything to sort of propel the plot. What I really like doing is, because I love these books. So as much as I think Sherlock Holmes is a tool, I like his adventures. I really, really like, I love Agatha Christie novels to pieces, but I've read them all inside out multiple times, so I know them really well. So when I'm writing my books, I'm kind of writing them with an eye of being a reader as well. I'm trying to always think about what the reader expects to happen next. What is the trope at this point that you think is going to turn up? And then I give you the trope, but it doesn't mean the thing that you think it's going to mean. That's the idea always, that all the tropes are present and correct. They don't do the thing that you think they're going to do. They're going to lead you somewhere else into a different, and that's kind of I almost use reader expectation as a red herring in itself. Like they are the best ways of misdirecting people, because you go in thinking, oh, I've read this before, I know what that character's about, and then they're not, and that's delightful. But the idea of putting in a clue that would just go nowhere just pisses me off.
Do you have to go back over it when you finish the draft with that eye of, have I given it away too early?
It's hard. Like when I plot the novels and I start writing them, 7 Deaths, I gave no clues. Like I was so terrified of that.
Yeah, there was nothing in that clued me into anything that was going to happen.
And that was like the 5th draft over when I felt like I'd put too much in. I was like, oh, it's so obvious now.
I actually remember you were at a barbecue at my house and I had to ask you some follow-up questions about some of the characters, about who's that person, what do they do after that, where does this end?
Yeah, Jamie was withholding chicken until I answered questions. It was, but this one, I was much more confident about the reader expectation and kind of like the way I'd laid the clues, I felt like I'd laid the clues in 7 Deaths well enough by the time I got to the end of it, but it took me a long time to have the confidence to do that. And this one, that was my starting point. It was like, okay, that goes in, that goes in, that goes in. These are the big things. They're going to go in, and this is what I'm going to build around it, and this is what I'm going to do with it. But raking over, I was really worried about that for the first book, and this book I kind of did it to my satisfaction, then trusted that my editor who read it, and obviously my editor read it, but then my agent read it, and like some close friends and family read it, and that they would like tell me if I'd given the game way too early. But yeah, it is a tricky thing to do, because as the author, you want to keep it all for yourself.
Yeah, and there is that point. It's not the big Poirot reveal, but it certainly is kind of, and here's how I did it.
Yeah. idea. I'm wedded to the trope of that.
Yeah.
The big problem I had with this novel was that it's initially started off as much of a horror novel as a mystery novel. And they don't work together. They do not go together. They don't want to go together. A horror novel wants to kill everybody. Like, it's just inclination that builds tension and reveals more of the monster and reveals more of the story by killing characters. And they are the plot beats. That's almost always just the plot beats, is you kill a person with information. Whereas a mystery novel needs to keep everyone alive because they are your suspects. So I was writing a horror novel which is trying to kill all my suspects, and there was like a draft where there was only like 3 people left, and you were like, oh, it's that person, like, because they were the only, like, you could just take a flyer on it. So that was the difficulty of this novel, was trying to sort of balance those 2 competing elements and create, because if you don't kill everyone off, then the monster has no threat. The monster's doing nothing at all. It's inert. So that was a really funny thing to try and balance, because I ended up moving it more away from sort of a Stephen King horror to almost like a gothic horror, and just going back to that sort of like, that sort of like just creeping tension and dread thing.
I'm quite grateful for that, because I have absolutely no stomach for modern horror. I will avoid almost anything horror based, but gothic horror I can deal with. And I see what you mean. In terms of horror, you have to almost know what the thing is that's doing this.
Yeah.
Whereas in a mystery, you can't know.
No. Again, you want to treat, because I thought they would go together, because I honestly thought that they had similar traits. Like, the monster stays in the background, the protagonist of a murder mystery, not protagonist, sorry, the antagonist of a murder mystery stays in the background. Like, they've got secrets, you've got to unveil those secrets. Yeah, it was just those competing cores, which I never had with Seven Deaths, because Seven Deaths, it turns out that sci-fi and a murder mystery go together quite elegantly. They go together quite well, and they fit together. So I think I was led into a false sense of security about what I was doing.
Very good. I'll ask one more question, then I think we're gonna hand it over. You talked about Agatha Christie. You talked about Arthur Conan Doyle. Are there any other kind of reference points for this? I honestly thought of Dickens when I read Samuel Pipps. I don't know if it's just the name Pipps is quite Dickensian.
That's from Pepys, isn't it? The diaries.
Oh, yeah.
So I just nicked his name wholesale. I did that quite a lot, actually. Now that I think about it. The reference point, not really. Seven Deaths had a bunch of them, but Conan Doyle for the detective, that's just where I started. But the rest of it, because I didn't want to write, with no arrogance intended, I didn't want to write an article novel, in the sense that I want the detail and I want it to feel like it's a real ship, but I didn't want to be beholden to the way ships worked in the period. I just wanted it in the background. I wanted the ship to be crucial to the mystery, but I didn't want to be writing a thing where the details of sailing were the crucial things. So I purposely avoided those novels. I did my historical research and then I came back. So a bunch of it comes from these journals and the historical research I did. And it's kind of, I suppose it's beholden to the inspiration of it and Conan Doyle and Captain Blood. Yeah,
it's certainly not like Patrick O'Brien by way of Stephen King, is it?
No, very much not.
It's not that kind of...
No, I just, again, there's actually a note at the back of the book, which is an apology to history and boats, which is where, because I take liberties with both of those things extravagantly, because my principal concern was putting a murder mystery on a haunted boat. And anything that got in the way of that, up to a point, I tried to be as respectful as possible, but that was my central focus, and that's what I wanted to make work. So there's little bits of the boat that don't operate the way they would have been, because I couldn't get the mystery to work that way. So hopefully it's not gregarious and it's not too much, but yeah, it's definitely not Patrick O'Brien.
Excellent. We're going to throw it open now to questions from the actual floor and indeed, I believe, the virtual floor.
Yes, hi, it's Ben. So I'm being inundated with questions from the virtual crowd. So I'm going to just get through a couple of those. And
sure.
If any of the audience have questions, put your hands up. Alison, who's going to do the mic? Can I firstly, I'm going to go to Alison Williams, actually. She's dialed in from California, would you believe it? So I think she deserves first question. What was the demon hunting course you went on? I think she's planning to come over and do it.
No, I did that in the US.
Oh, did you?
Yeah. So when I was touring with Seven Deaths in the US, I got talking to someone after a few drinks, I got someone talking to someone about the second novel. And I said, it's like, it's going to have this demon on board. And they're like, oh, cool. There's like there's a guy down the, like a Baptist church. He runs like demon hunting courses. It's like, what? And he's like, yeah, no, seriously. Like, you can go in, he does like exorcisms, and like, he performed, I'm sure, I'd had a few beers, I could be wrong on this, I'm pretty sure he said at some point he'd exorcised a cat. Like, he thought there was a possessed cat and he'd somehow exorcised it. How was you gonna know? Exactly, yeah. So it was very strange. So I went like the next day, because I was catching a flight in the afternoon, and I went the next day and just they introduced me to this guy. And he took me out and he just ran me through sort of like how to spot a demon in the wild, like when it's possessing a person, the steps you would need to sort of safeguard yourself against them, just methods you could take. Basically, it was very much like just as you would with the police. Like, you know, if you see a terrorist or you see someone who looks suspicious, go and find a policeman. But this was like, come to him. Like, it was like, just come to him and he will deal with it. But yeah, there was very obviously like, you know, you need the religious artifacts, like just cover yourself and you will be safe and sort of thing. But there was something specific, like I wasn't allowed to, he couldn't like whisper in my ear. I wasn't allowed, as if that would come up, as if he just come a bit closer. So yeah, if you do meet a demon in the wild, don't let it whisper in your ear. This is crucial, okay? So.
Just do one of those 3 slogans like the government: stay alert, control the demon.
Yeah, exactly. So the messaging will change next week, so we're all doomed. Tier 2 demon at work.
The next question, keep in mind, Alison sent a load of questions, but Angiola from Italy, she wins the second furthest away prize. Is Stuart planning to present his book in Italy once it's been translated? Has he ever been inspired by Shirley Jackson's books?
Not inspired, but I love Shirley Jackson's books. She was one of the reference points for when I said I turned it from Stephen King to Gothic horror. Shirley Jackson was one of the authors I went back and read because she does it masterfully. Yes, it's coming to it. It'll be published. I don't know. It's published now or in a couple of weeks. Certainly, it was supposed to be published simultaneously, but the pandemic sort of slowed everything down, slowed the translation down. But it should be out there soon. And I was actually supposed to be there last week for a big event in Milan that the pandemic put an end to, sadly. So hopefully as soon as all this calms down, yeah, I'll come to Italy and present the book.
Let me knock 2 questions out in one go. So Katie Baxter from Berkhamsted and Caroline Wallace from Little Gadsden both asked, are there any plans for either of your books to be on TV or on film?
Yes, indeed. Yeah, so Seven Deaths has finally been greenlit, which means that they begin to cast it now. I don't think I'm allowed to say who's doing it yet because they want to make a big announcement about it, but it's me. It's me with a little camera and Jamie. Jamie's now being cast, and Ben's going to be in it as well. Ben's playing like 5 characters. So yes, so that's happening. And that's going to be very exciting. That should start shooting early next year for telly. And the second one, we're in conversations with a few people. The problem with the second book is that it's set on a boat, which is incredibly hard to film anyway, because it's really expensive. And it's set on it's quite a claustrophobic environment, which during a pandemic would be a huge problem. So we've had a lot of people just come back and be like, yeah, we're thinking about doing it. We have no idea how. So it may just go on the back burner until all of this calms down.
Rose Evans from Welling, I don't know why I'm doing the geographical thing, but Rose Evans, she is asking, she loves the character, the relationship between Arent and Sammy. Would you consider revisiting them and perhaps write a short story or 2 about their past cases?
There's actually a few. In the very first draft where I wrote 170,000 words, I actually interspersed them with a bunch of short stories about their past cases. And the idea for that was that the short stories would have relevance to the modern case that they were working on, and it would all begin to tie in. In practice, it just meant you had 900 characters to keep hold of in various different time periods, so it didn't work, so I tossed it. But I've still got the short stories. So one of them turned up in a Waterstone special edition. So the Waterstone special edition, it's got the short story at the back, which is how they first met before this book begins. So that has a short story. There's another one floating around. I can't remember where that's gone. That's for some event, and I'm doing one for a charity edition that we're doing for children in need for the BBC. So there'll at least be 3 in the wild, and I wrote 7. So I'll probably try and find ways to get them out in various different editions, because they're already written and they're very, very Sherlock Holmesian. They were my way of like learning how to do that method of deduction, because it's not something I just wanted to throw straight into the book. I wanted to work out how it would do and what the relationship was. So yeah, there's 7 short stories somewhere.
Fantastic. If there are any from the floor, I have more, but put your hands up. Harriet's got the microphone. So
come on, floor, represent.
You're being overwhelmed by the virtual crowd at the moment. Melissa Massey from Maidenhead. That's lovely.
It's really nice, isn't it?
Would like to hear about your new book.
So with my publisher.
Is there anything in the pipeline, or next?
Yeah, I've just signed a 2-book deal with my publisher for 2 more. So that is pretty exciting. What can I say about it? It's insane. I'm terrified, which is a good starting point, because I was terrified with 7 Deaths. I was terrified with Devil. As a starting point for writing, being terrified is pretty good, it turns out, because it means you're doing something a bit risky, and I have no idea how I'm going to pull the conceit off that I have in my head. Literally no idea. So I'm planning it right now, and I keep getting to the same point of just being like, I got nothing. So hopefully it'll all come together. But if it works, it will be completely nuts and completely brilliant and just so much fun. Just so much fun.
Brilliant. Okay. I'll go back to Melissa as well, actually. Question about plotting process. How detailed does Stuart make his chapter plot outline before he gets started?
So as I say, I spent 3 months doing it, but the actual outlines are just 1 line on an Excel spreadsheet. And what I usually do is I will just say, right, this is what's happening in the chapter. That'll be like 1 sentence. And then the next one will be like, this is because what I've discovered I struggle with is knowing what my characters, what they think they know versus what I actually know what's actually happening. So, and then developing the reasoning along the lines of what they think is happening, not with an eye to sort of like what's actually happening. So in my plans, I always have, this is what the chapter's about. This is like the clue or the thing within it that is the important piece of information. Do they know it's there or not? No. Which chapter does it come up in? And then I will have, what do they suspect is happening versus what's actually happening. So it's like, and then that's how I plan every chapter.
Seems almost like a flow chart.
Yeah.
Do they know this? No. If so, go here.
Go. It is a little bit like, it does actually bit of that, yeah, because it's really, really difficult. It was very difficult with 7 Deaths because 7 Deaths was they're both very intricate in terms of their plot, but 7 Deaths had to happen the way it happened, otherwise everything fell apart because it was just 1 day on repeat. So if one character was one place and 1 day in their different place, the entire plot didn't work. This one, I had a bit more latitude with that. I could just move people around the ship to make things work. But yeah, both plans are very, very intricate.
Brilliant. Alison Williams, let's go back to her. She's in Ventura, California. What was the most interesting fact you learned when researching?
Oh, tons. It was a great period. So the company behind this is run by a board of directors called the Gentleman 17, which is brilliant. And basically everything I write about them was true. And it makes them sound like the most sinister cabal, like the QAnon of their day. But they existed, they were there, and they had these like secret meetings, and they would just turn up in disguises because they didn't want anyone to know who they were. It was like brilliant. But they founded the Dutch East India Company. The Dutch East India Company is effectively the model for like capitalism as we know it. Like they traded shares and they had stakeholders and all the rest of it, and that developed through their business. The 1 in 3 that I mentioned earlier, people who would settle on these boats and would die, was fascinating. That sailors used to wipe their bums on knotted rope was something that I found particularly fascinating and horrific. What else? That they washed their clothes in urine. That was very upsetting because it was better than scratchy salt water. because if they washed it in salt water, then obviously it would itch, and that was uncomfortable over 7 months. But smelling of piss, that just goes away. So that was much better. Imagine that being the decision you had to make that day. Oh,
lesser of two evils, isn't it?
Yeah. But why is the decision as well? Like, my clothes stink, so
Just make it worse.
Yeah, I'm going to make it worse. So yes, loads of brilliant facts.
The Gentleman 17 in particular sort of reminded me of a kind of old day Bilderberg or something like that.
Yeah.
Conference of these like powerful people that dictate the terms of commerce and that kind of
and
thing.
everything, and they were like above kings. I mean, these guys they were so rich that they were beyond any laws. They were beyond any sort of like supervision. Like, what could you do? Like, they got so powerful, they had their own army, they had their own currency, they had their own fleets. Like, you could not touch them. You couldn't do a thing about them, which, if you look at the way modern corporations are going, is something we should probably be taking heed of.
Anything in the room at the moment?
Come on, guys.
Come on. That's all right, I've got
Either
more.
that or we can't hear them behind the mask.
Yeah.
No, I've got more. Rose Evans literally just asked this: will your next book be historical again, historical fiction?
Oh, it's weird that answering that question might be a spoiler, so I'm not going to say anything.
Oh gosh. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, straight on to Alison Williams again. She's going to keep going. What's your favourite part about writing a character?
Getting to know them, I think. Like, it's the really weird. It makes you. I don't know how you find this, but like, it makes you sound like a bit of a sociopath. But like, because I discover my characters in writing them. I fill them in effectively as I go. It's like, it's like a silhouette, and then I colour them in as I go along. And having them do through the writing surprising things, like, so when, as I say, Sara in this novel, the way she developed was surprising to me. For someone who plots meticulously and kind of knows all the elements, that she ended up being an entirely different character to the one that I thought she was going to be. It was just wonderful. Like, it was really, really great. And now I'm desperately hoping that happens for the next novel as well, that I can have that process, because there wasn't really room for it to happen in Seven Deaths, and I enjoyed it immensely. Come on, Room. Come on.
Is there another...
Come on. What? Yes! Hooray!
Stand up. Hi, I'm Alex Atkinson.
Hiya.
I'd like to know a little bit about how you got started with writing. So, had you written a book before? Was it horrible? Have we not heard about that? And so I know Seven Deaths was your first book, but I'd like to know a little bit more.
Yeah, I mean, it was... So I've wanted to write a novel since I was 8. That's when I started reading Agatha Christie novels. Just adored them. I wanted to write one of her novels before I wanted to write novels. Like, I didn't want to be a novelist. I didn't want to write books. I didn't really understand what books. I just wanted one of them. And I got exactly that because I loved them so much. And that, the moment I had that idea, that's always been the flag in the distance. Like, it just planted itself in my psychology somewhere, and I was always chasing after it. Not directly. Like, it wasn't me just being like, I will do this step, this step, this step. But in the distance, I was always like, at some point, I'd like to write a novel. And I had a crack at it when I was 21 and wrote garbage. Just hot garbage. Just like nightmares to this day about people finding it on my hard drive and just been like, that guy did, God. So I only wrote, that novel would have been about 35,000 words. It wasn't a novel. It was just like, it was the beginning, and I just worked. It was terrible. And that's what I realized, that I didn't have an original idea at all. I was just remixing Agatha Christie tropes. I wasn't doing anything with them. There was nothing in it that was mine. It was all the stuff I'd learned about her. And also, it was badly written. I didn't know how to write. I didn't know how to... I had sort of like... I think without arrogance, I think I had like a nugget of talent. I just didn't know how to sustain it over a longer period. So you'd have paragraphs which were very nice and very nice metaphors and similes. But then the overall structure of the novel was terrible and the pacing was awful. So I knew at that point, I kind of knew I wanted to write. So I kind of drifted into journalism because I'd been writing and I wanted to carry on writing. And at that point, there were still journalism jobs to drift into. So that was nice. And that was kind of, but again, the flag was always there in the distance. But I never tried writing a novel again until Seven Deaths, because I became so preoccupied with with this Agatha Christie novel I wanted to write and the original idea that would spark it. And I was also just writing on it, like Jamie's the saying, like Jamie, our jobs are to write and journalism. And if you're writing every day, the last thing I wanted to do was go home at night and write some more. Like, it's not what I wanted to do. So I think I was learning and practicing by doing my journalism, because I was doing journalism across a lot of different subjects. There was a lot of lifestyle, celebrity interviews, travel journalism, technology journalism, different styles and different structures. So I was getting my education. And it wasn't until I was 34, I think. I can't even remember now, but I'm pretty sure it was 34 that I sat down to try and write Seven Deaths. And there is a thing, I don't know if Jamie agrees, not all authors do, but for me, I can't possibly see how you learn to write a novel without writing a novel. Like, it's the awful thing. Like, it's such a difficult thing to sit down every day for that amount of time that's required and write a novel. I mean, that's the bit that I find the most difficult. Like, I find just actually sitting down in the morning for 6 hours or 8 hours or whatever my day is going to be, just sitting there and doing it is so hard for me. And then just knowing how you're pacing it and not to lose faith in it as you go along. Like, all these things I only did by actually doing it. And so I think, I mean, that's the hard part when people come in, like, how'd you get into this? How'd you do it? And the awful answer is you just got to do it. You just got to sit down and write a novel, and it will probably be bad. And then once you've done that, you'll probably have to write another one that'll be better. It's just kind of it.
It's true, isn't it? I mean, you learn by doing. I remember the first book I wrote didn't go anywhere. The second book I wrote did. And the third book I wrote I found really easy. We were talking about this beforehand, that I'm now kind of going back again to kind of go back into it again. And you just get full of doubt, and you're like, oh God, I have no idea what I'm doing. And you think, oh, there are two books. I don't think it ever necessarily goes away, but you do get slightly better at it as time goes on.
Like, I've discovered, like, in slightly off topic, I'm sorry, but like writing the first novel, I was convinced I'd learn loads of stuff, and I just haven't. Like, I just didn't at all. Like, I started the second novel and just made brand new mistakes rather than making the old mistakes. So I suspect maybe that's just the process for every book. It's its own thing. It's its own structure. I'm just going to make a bunch of mistakes.
Terrible business.
Yeah, it's terrible. Everyone should stay away from it.
So, of course, we're running, just gone over time, actually. So, two very quick questions. I suspect Rose Evans has asked, do you have any superstitions when you're writing, things you have to do to ward off bad luck?
No, I'm annoyingly rational in all aspects of my life, and everyone hates me for it. I don't believe in anything that I can't see, touch, or explain.
Fantastic. Yeah. And the final question, this is from our Italian viewer, Angiola. Does he support Liverpool or Everton?
Liverpool. Yeah. And not recently, all right? Like, not one of them. I was there for the hurt all that time. This is what being a Manchester United fan must have been like all those in the 90s. I have to constantly explain. I've been here forever, all right? Through the pain. I am 95% suffering and only 5% joy. Yeah.
I'm standard state. I was always worried we'd get onto football at some point. We always thought that might be a diversion. And it's been audience led. I think we're gonna wrap up there.
Yeah.
Anything else? No, that's it. We're going to wrap up there. So it just remains for me to say thank you very much to Stu. Do read the book. I know Waterstones have got the extra chapter, but please buy one from Our Bookshop in Tring.
Please support local bookshops. Please.
And thanks very much to Ben and Our Bookshop for putting on the first physical event in quite a long time. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Ben. Thank you, Jamie. Thank you, everyone.
Yay! Thank you.